Really excited about the next speaker, Kate O'Neill. She's been helping humanity prepare for an increasingly tech-driven future by teaching business how to make technology that's better for humans. That sounds pretty cool to me. I can't do justice to Kate's background in a really short introduction, but I'm going to give it a go. So previously, Kate was CEO of MetaMarketer, a first-of-its-kind analytics and strategy agency, and she also created the first content management role at Netflix. She led cutting-edge online optimization work at magazines.com and developed Toshiba, America's first intranet. I feel like a low achiever. It's fine. Thanks, Kate. So, without much ado, ladies and gentlemen, we've had some phenomenal speakers today. I am delighted to introduce Kate O'Neill to the stage. Please give her a warm Kelly welcome and be upstanding, but you don't have to stand, for Kate O'Neill. Come on, Kate.
Thank you. Wow, it's so great to be played on to the stage, too. The band's doing fantastic. I'm so pleased to be here with you today. I'm so glad I got a chance to hear some of the last few speakers, to get a chance to hear the sincerity with which there is a commitment to purpose in this organization. So I want to talk to you about the work that I have done and what I've observed through that, which is about human experience and how it can be more meaningful, both in technology and in data. So I thought it would be helpful if we start the conversation by framing up what it is we mean when we talk about being human. So I'm going to have this little trouble with the clicker here. The whole presentation. Sorry, let me just click over here. Sorry, there we go. What is something that you think of when you think of what it means to be human? If you think of like one word or one characteristic, a trait, even a limitation that you think of when you think of humanity, what is that one word? Just hold it in your mind. Think of that one thing. And so how many of you thought of something like, there we go, creativity? I might have to switch to a different clicker. How many of you thought of something like creativity, like innovation? Hands up, let's see. Yeah, that's a really common answer. I'm over here too. The ability to be innovative, to think of ideas and inspiration on the fly, like how do you deal with a clicker that isn't working for you at any given moment? That's a very human trait. What about empathy or love? How many of you thought of that? Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot of answers for that. And I agree, that's a really lovely, wonderful human trait, for sure. How many of you, though, thought of something like, come on, How many of you thought of checking a box? Hands up. I know there must have been somebody in this room that thought, yeah. You've seen this, though, right? This is a reCAPTCHA that's, you've probably passed along in your travels on the web somewhere, usually when you're checking out on some e-commerce form or filling out some other form. And the idea, of course, that you could somehow validate your human existence by checking this box and saying, I'm not a robot, is absurd, right? It's patently absurd. But here's the thing about absurdity, is that it sits in tension in opposite to meaning. Where there is a lack of meaning defined, it sort of creates this void into which absurdity can flow, almost. So we find a lot of absurdity in technology and in business, where there has been not enough consideration to the meaning of what the experience is going to be. This is gonna get funny, I swear. All right. And the reason why it's important to pay attention to that is that people crave meaning. We seek it, right? I mean, that's a very universal truth about human existence. We are always seeking meaning. And when it's offered to us, it's irresistible. Like, if you can figure out what's meaningful about something that you're offering to someone and frame it in that way, create a relevant, contextual experience, people are going to have a hard time saying no to that. That's a true fact about meaning. So, given that, we should have a little conversation about what we're talking about when we talk about meaningful work. Because a lot of our identity over the years, over generations, has been wrapped up in what we do for a living, right? There's names that have been handed down through generations that were the jobs of our ancestors, right? Like baker and brewer and carpenter and tanner and, I mean, any number of others. And it's not just in English. Lots and lots of languages do this. I'm an O'Neill, and that is apparently a descendant of somebody who was a somebody. But the point is there's this kind of legacy of what you are as a thing, what your job is, what your role is relative to the community, right? And how you contribute to the community. So we carry that with us. It's part of our identity, but also we derive this sense of what our value is, what our sense of self-worth is by what it is we do for a living. And the reason it's really important to talk about that is because of this, that automation is going to displace or greatly transform a vast number of jobs in the not too distant future. So this is a study done at the University of Oxford, and it looks at cities across the United States and what percentage of the jobs within those cities are considered at highest risk of being potentially automatable. So I've called out, you can see New York, New Jersey area, which I live in New York, and so it's just over 55% of jobs that are considered at risk of being automatable. Well, that's a lot, right? That's a whole lot of jobs. So what does that mean from a socioeconomic standpoint? What does it mean from a psychological standpoint? We just talked about how much meaning we derive personally from our work. Well, those questions, I think, we'll have to wait and see how economists weigh in and politicians weigh in on policy and things like that. But we have to think about what it's going to look like as machines start to take over some of the tasks, some of the jobs that we're used to performing. Because we know it's not going to be about working harder. It's not even going to be about working smarter, to use that oft-quoted adage. It's just something different. So we got to understand what it's going to look like when a lot of the meaning that we sense in the world about ourselves, about our place in the world, is coming from something other than our work. And in the meantime, we need to create the most meaningful work experiences that we can and further those into culture. So the opportunity is to think about the opportunity around the digitization of human work. So there's the data models that are allowing things like the gig economy to scale and the sharing economy. So transforming the nature of employer and employee relationships, right? That's fundamentally different. There's a value shift that's been taking place in that. And we do have to recognize this possibility that within our lifetimes, there may come a post-human work world, or at least most of the jobs or tasks are not being done by humans, are being done by machines. And why do we have to pay attention to that? Well, we'll go back to the I'm not a human, I'm not a robot checkbox. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but we can't even rest on our laurels about the checkbox. The robots are going to take over checking our boxes. We got to have something that's going to replace the identity, the meaning that comes from that. And here's the thing, I'm not anti-automation. I'm here to talk with you about how you automate meaningfully, because business will not be successful long-term without automation and digitization. It just won't. You have to scale through those means, because businesses that scale through digitization and automation are going to scale greater and faster. So that has to be part of it. But here's the other part of that equation. Humanity won't be successful long-term without meaning. We gotta have it. So we gotta figure out how to balance those needs. And this is my proposal. My proposal is that we figure out what it is that's meaningful about our interactions, about the experiences we create with the people outside and inside of companies that we work within and around. Every interaction that we help design and create in the world, that we think about how to make it more meaningful. Oh, look at that. Almost had it behind the back. These are the fundamental questions that I ask in my work. I'm an experienced strategist, first and foremost. I'm an author and speaker as well. But the work that I do is about helping business scale meaningfully through strategic alignment and through automation, while also asking the question of how can we create more meaningful experiences and then scale those through data and automation. So it's kind of an irreverent question to say, how could we actually automate meaningful experiences? But it's a really important question right now, in this moment that we're in. Oh, I did it behind the back. So these are some of the brands I've been privileged to work with and for and around, speak to, and so on. And every one of them has had some sort of transformative need to deal with how they're going to figure out the meaning of the experiences that they're trying to build at scale. And what's been great about doing so many different kinds of projects with so many different kinds of companies is that it all comes back to a very central realization, and that is that you can use data and emerging technology to scale what is meaningful. Because really, automation isn't what's new about this discussion. Any of you who remember back to the 1970s or so, we had ATMs back then. We were replacing tellers at banks. We had, in the 1980s, we had robots on car manufacturing lines doing some of the work of putting cars together. That part is not really the big transformation. So why is it such an important discussion in business right now? Well, maybe it's this term, digital transformation. Everybody's got to be talking about that. Well, I actually think that ship has kind of sailed too. I think it's a bit of a misnomer. We already made a digital transformation. I mean, my silly example here of an analog alarm clock to a digital alarm clock has a point. Anytime you plug something into a wall and you're using electronics to power an experience, it's digital. But really, the moment you and I began spending our workdays in front of computers transacting in bits and bytes, we were already making a digital transformation. So what's more to the point is the data transformation. It's more about the fact that you're using data throughout the business to optimize the business algorithmically. And you're using different points throughout the organization that are connected in different ways to become smarter. And of course, one of the biggest parts of this discussion is AI, right? Which is an umbrella term for a whole set of technologies: machine learning, cognitive computing, image recognition, natural language processing, all different kinds of different disparate skills that machines can acquire, but that taken together, are a kind of intelligence. But the ability to put AI power behind experience creation and empower business is transforming it. It is making it faster. It's accelerating that process. So all the more reason why This whole discussion about digital transformation, digitization, automation, AI, all of that discussion is first and foremost about agility with data. That's what we're talking about. And here's the catch, or sort of the flip side to that discussion, is that business data is largely about people. When you're talking about the data that flows through almost every business, and even if you start to name exceptions like maybe heavy manufacturing, you're still talking about producing goods that people consume. It always comes back at some level to people. Creating experiences for people, creating products for people, creating services for people. And it's about using the data in the organization to make the business more efficient, more effective, more successful at delivering those experiences for people. All I ask is that we're a little more meaningful about how we do it. So what if we took this moment, we stood here in this moment where things are transforming around us? What if we recognized this opportunity and said, all right, let's not rush headlong into putting data and emerging technologies of various kinds into our businesses willy-nilly. Let's be very intentional about this. Let's stop and think, what if we think about what it is that makes people respond? And how can we help make people thrive by doing that? This is why I call myself a tech humanist. That's me. I wrote a manifesto a few months ago called the Tech Humanist Manifesto, and it got virally shared. This is a really resonant idea right now. I think a lot of people are feeling this pinch of all of the transformation that's taking place and really feeling like, well, where are we in this whole picture? But this is something I've been talking about for many years because we've talked a lot in business about user experience, customer experience, patient, employee, all this experience, candidate experience, right? But what we need to do is actually take that up a level and look more holistically across those different roles that each of us steps into at any given time. Because you are all, I am also, every one of these roles at some point in our lives, right? We are all these things. And it's really powerful to understand the nuance behind that when you're creating experiences for people. Because you're able to reach much more relevant parts of their decision-making, much more aligned parts of their value systems, and figure out where it is you're coming from and they're coming from motivationally that already fit together, and amplify that. That's the power of it. So this is a comic that was drawn for me by a friend of mine, Rob Cottingham, who draws the cartoon Noise to Signal. And if you can't read the caption, it's getting harder and harder to hold on to my humanity, but wow, is it easy to track my Amazon deliveries. This is absurdity, right? This is what happens when we allow technology and business drivers to create experiences for us that are not in touch with our humanity, that aren't in touch with meaning and purpose. I think there's a way to accomplish everything we want to accomplish in an aligned, holistic way. And here's the reason that it gives me hope for that is because when you break it down, what gives humans the best sort of motivation is that we thrive on a sense of meaning, right? A sense of common goals and the idea that we're fulfilling something bigger than ourselves. Everybody before me has talked about these same ideas. Machines thrive on clarity and succinct instructions. And guess what? Purpose is kind of the one common thread there. If you can be really clear and intentional about what it is you're trying to accomplish in a very purposeful way, you get to achieve both of those objectives. You get to make people thrive, and you get to make machines work at scale. And they're not in opposition to each other. They're actually empowering each other's success. I do a lot of work around meaning in my work, in my research, in my writing. And I have found that the shape that meaning takes is different in different contexts. And in business strategy, which is where I spend most of my consulting time and work time, the shape meaning takes is purpose. But it's organizational purpose, it's alignment. It's it's lovely to talk about purpose in this way that has kind of a sense of what your life is about. It's a really important discussion. But when it comes to aligning the business or getting the business to operate more effectively, what really distills that is this sense that organizationally, you're driving toward the same outcomes. Like you have the same shared values. You're trying to accomplish the same things. I love the example, since we're here in Orlando, one of my favorite examples of a sort of strategic purpose statement is Disney theme parks and their create magical experiences distillation, right? When you think about the idea that what they're about is to create magical experiences, what I love about that is that anywhere within the organization, anywhere sort of within the hierarchy or in any part of the organization, if you brought somebody a problem and said, hey, how do you solve this? All they'd have to do is think about, how do I solve this so that it creates the most magical experiences? It's a very clarifying thought. But I also use the examples on this slide of technology because Disney was able to make a $2 billion+ investment in these My Magic bands because they brought together this very magical experience of being able to pay for things, being able to get into your room, being able to make your way around the park better and more seamlessly because of the technology and the data that was embedded within them. So this sense of strategic purpose very clearly leads to this ability to have a much more purposeful strategy. And that may sound like a tautology, but it's not. The sense that meaningful business, that transformation comes about from just deciding to do something differently can't happen unless you're actually stepping back and thinking about what's meaningful about it. Anytime we've ever talked about business process automation throughout the last few decades, right? Like ever since that's been a discussion within business, any of you who have worked around BPO or had your MBAs talking about that subject, you'll know always you wanted to think when you talked about process, you have to step back and say, what is this process trying to accomplish? And what could we do that actually makes this more efficient? I've seen so many examples in companies of forms and workflows that became automated that were based on somebody who had left the company like 20 years ago, and it was some quirk that they had that they wanted to know this one data point that nobody needed and nobody collected and nobody did anything with, but it became embedded in their systems and got codified into their systems over time and became impossible to wrench out of the systems because everything had been built around it and nobody had stopped to ask the question about what is the purpose of what we're doing here? How do we get to a point where we're automating what's meaningful? The opportunity of doing that is that you keep from scaling absurdity. And I keep coming back to the idea of absurdity because it's so easy to let absurdity creep in the back door. And once it's there, it's really hard to wriggle out. One of the best recent examples of this is Amazon. I'm picking on them a little bit too much here, but there we go. Amazon just recently launched this Amazon Go store in Seattle. How many of you have seen news about it? A lot of you? Yeah. So it's this just walk out model, right? Like they've got everything on the shelves just like a regular grocery store, but you've got an app and you are walking into a system that's tracking you, so you can just pick something up off the shelf and walk out. And you pay for it, by it registering on your app. Well, this is cool and fun, and I'm excited to try it. But I also notice, now it decides to catch up with me. I gotta go back. Goodness, okay. When I open the app, there's a set of instructions that kind of orient you to how to use this. What it says is, anything you take off the shelf is automatically added to your virtual cart. So if you take something off the cart for somebody else, or off the shelf for somebody else, you're going to get charged for it. Sorry. Well, that's something that I don't know about you, but I'm a reasonably tall person, and maybe you have some other advantage going for you in a grocery environment, the competitive retail grocery environment. But there's plenty of times that people ask me to reach something for them that's on a high shelf, and I like doing it. I like being helpful. It's very nice of you to help out somebody else, but you just got charged for that thing. And you can get it off of your bill. That's not the point. The point is that this experience now starts to incentivize us not to help each other. And when you take that to an illogical conclusion, you've now started to build a society where people don't help each other. And I'm not being extremist here. This is what happens. We create culture with every bit of experience we make. So if Amazon leaves this in place, and I'm sure they'll get to it, they'll change that. They'll fix the array of sensors and cameras that determine how you get charged for products, and it won't be an issue. But I'm saying this is how easily this kind of thing creeps into the decision-making, the experience design, the data, and the automation that we're building all the time, even companies that have technology as their core competency, like Amazon. So I wrote a lot about this in my book, Pixels in Place, which is about connected experiences and the connection between the digital and the physical environments. And what I wrote about a lot was that how you have a data trail as you go through the world. Like everything that you do, everywhere you go, especially carrying your phone or wearing your watch or whatever, you are basically getting pegged on cameras and sensors, and you're creating this little vapor trail almost of data behind you. And it's kind of cool, because it allows for some really interesting customization of your experiences, but it's also a little creepy, let's be honest. And so we have to be very conscious of what the environment is that we're creating there with that. When we're in business harnessing that, we have to be very mindful of the data we collect from our consumers, from our end users, from the people who do business with us, and how we transform that for automation, for data agility, and of course for profit. We're all going to need to make a profit. This is business after all. But also this future where human experiences are more meaningful, and where we can infuse all of those experiences that we're all having with more and more meaning, partly to make up for a world in which we don't derive as much meaning from our work because we don't have as much of that work. That's just one reason to do it. Another reason to do it is what's been mentioned already today a few times. Purposeful companies are more profitable. Meaningful experiences create more loyalty. There is a great deal of incentive that really aligns with natural business incentives to create these more meaningful experiences and align your business around purpose. So I propose a model that I have created called the human-centric digital transformation model. So everybody keeps talking about digital transformation. I want us to think about the humanity that's always within all of those systems. So kind of quickly, I don't want to overwhelm anybody. I'll make some of this information available. But you start with this purpose idea and identify what it is that your purpose is. And I'm not talking about mission statements and vision statements and the kind of cloudy corporate doublespeak that a lot of times gets passed around and doesn't really mean anything. That's a lot of times kind of absurd. What I'm talking about is that Disney-esque 3 to 5 word distillation. You can make it 7, whatever, something like that, something very crisp that really gets at what it is you're in business to do, what makes you stand out, and what it is you're trying to achieve at scale. And then you have to add into that culture, which is how it's going to live around you in your organization, how it's going to come to life, and brand, which is how it's going to be seen and felt outside the organization. So those 3 things together, purpose, brand, and culture, kind of form this purpose core. And then from that, you can start thinking about what are the experiences that you can pull out of purpose, culture, and brand, and create these kind of metaphorical, contextually relevant, dimensional experiences, like how you're going to create interactions with people. What are the touch points of your relationship going to be, and what are they going to feel like? What should they feel like? How do you metaphorically extend the idea of what you're in business to do into those experiences? And then how can you align your operations internally meaningfully as well? And I'm talking about asking questions about your processes and policies. Even things like meeting schedule can be a really big determinant of whether you feel truly connected with what you've said you're trying to accomplish. And then how do you take the data that you're collecting and make it meaningful in the data model? How do you ask the questions that now remain? As you think about your strategy, what are the questions that you start to have about, well, what is a way that we could get somebody from this point to that point and have it be more successful, more profitable, more efficient, and also create more loyalty and so that we know that it's more meaningful, or whatever it is that's going to be the outcome of you creating a more meaningful experience in that way. So infuse that data model with meaning. And then from the experience strategy, meaningful operations, and data model, you can start to deploy relevant technology to scale all of that. It's not just about, oh, we need a wearables strategy. It's not just about what are we going to do with AR in our organization. It's about we understand what we're trying to achieve at scale. We understand the experiences we want to create. We understand who we are inside the company. And so we understand that this technology could accomplish this thing for us that gets us closer to that purpose, to that goal. Of course, you need to measure results, but you're measuring them in alignment with this meaningful strategy you've just created. And then you will take the insights out of those results and further refine all of what you've just done. So it is an iterative process. You don't have to get it right the first time. It's nice if you get some clarity through the process, but you always get to come back and refine and get clearer as you go. Oh, now I have to click through the build of that. It's a very heavy slide, I understand. It's a lot of things going on, but it's a lot of clarity that comes from infusing this much intentionality into every part of the organization. So when you think about digitizing, when you think about, which we know means model and data, right? We're talking about data when we talk about digital experience. And when we talk about digital transformation, we're talking about that transformation to digital, to data. We're talking about agility with data, and data is people. So when we think about digitizing, we want to find meaningful insights in the relationships we have with people. It's about people. When we talk about automation, what you're trying to accomplish is amplifying or accelerating that which you've shown to be meaningful. Everything you've just found through the process of using purpose to shed light on your entire organization, you can now accelerate. You can now create bigger and better experiences based on what you understand about what's meaningful to the people who interact with your company in various ways. So there's this difference between optimizing business for data versus optimizing business for data about people. And it has to do with that sense of empathy and the deeper sense of what drives people. And I have a favorite story about that. It's from a time when I was hired in to head up a web design shop. And when I started, like the day that I started, they had just launched a redesign of a website for a client that happened to be a marriage counseling retreat center. And so they had launched it a few days before, and we were just starting to get some of the analytics reports back, some of the early reports of how the site was performing. It was terrible. It was terrible. It was awful. All the conversions had plummeted. They were getting nothing out of this site. And I was like, well, what happened? So we looked at it, and in keeping with what were considered to be the best practices at that time, the designers had shortened the intake form, the inquiry form, from this two-screen inquiry form to just what would be absolutely necessary for someone to follow up with the person who was inquiring, like name and email address. But when I went and looked back at what was on that earlier inquiry form, it was stuff like, when did you first notice problems with your marriage? What have you tried so far? to help with your marriage? And while those questions didn't necessarily get the salesperson who still had to make the call at the end of the inquiry any closer to closing that sale necessarily, they actually made the person who was submitting the form feel more connected to the experience. They made them feel more like they understood the values of the organization that they were now doing business with. It started the interaction out on this very aligned footing. So we put it back, put the long form back in the newly redesigned website, and all the conversions came back and gradually grew, thank goodness. Whew. But that's the power of conveying humanity, even in digital interactions, even when you're talking about something as abstract as a website inquiry form. It really pays to think with empathy about the person on the other side of the experience and what they're going through, what their motivations are. So even all throughout digitization and automation, where humans can add the most value is simply by being human, by being in touch with what it is that sets us apart from machines, from other animals for that matter, and allowing us to thrive by adding that value. It's happening in all kinds of automated experiences that companies and technology startups are trying to replicate human-like experiences with automation. Like Google has been feeding romance novels to its AI so that it will have a better understanding of the language that people use when they talk about deeply emotional things. That's some nuance that they want the AI to know. There's an app I wrote about in Pixels in Place called Walk, W-A-L-C. And instead of giving you directions like a lot of GPS would, like go east for 0.8 miles or whatever, it uses landmarks, like most humans tend to do, and says, take a left at the McDonald's, take a right at the Chipotle, or whatever. So there's a lot of this going on where people are recognizing the value of simulating human experience in creating digital experiences. Because for right now, subtle nuances are not really where AI tends to shine. This is actually Muffin versus Puppy. It's kind of a classic image recognition problem. It's actually kind of been solved mostly at this point. But it's the type of problem that AI is going to repeatedly bump its head up, so to speak, against again and again and again as it tries to understand more and more of the world. But we get this, right? You look at pictures like this, and you know the difference between an apple and a barn owl. You're not struggling with that, right? I mean, maybe like in the aggregate of those pictures, but at an individual level, you don't have a problem because you understand nuance. Humans tend to understand nuance. We generally do it well. So an opportunity within organizations as we face digitization and automation is to repurpose human skills and qualities as lower-level tasks become automated, bring humans into higher value roles where nuance is more important, where an understanding of meaning and empathy for other people in the transaction is more relevant and more important. This can be accomplished. And one of the flip sides of that actually gets us closer to being able to do this with agility and scale is what I like to call the movie phone Kramer model. I don't know how many of you remember the Seinfeld episode where Kramer got a new phone number, and it was one digit off from movie phone, which I don't know how many of you remember, the service we actually used to have to call on the phone to find out what movies were playing at any given point in time. But because his phone number now was one digit off from movie phone, he was actually deciding to pretend to be movie phone because it was just easier to go with the flow and read the listings from the newspaper. But he couldn't understand the touch tone, and so he ended up just saying, "Why don't you just tell me what movie you'd like to see?" We're actually seeing a lot of this in the chatbot deployment space right now. And it happens a lot in customer call centers, where you might have a chatbot start an interaction that's actually a human fielding a question, but it's being sort of presented to you as if it's a robot, because it's a lot easier in the early stages of agile deployment of emerging technology to figure out what are going to be the meaningful patterns, what kind of questions are people going to ask most frequently. Once we have a script for those, we can automate those. And then the humans can continue to address the more nuanced questions and keep getting further and further down the line. Kramer didn't do so well, by the way. I don't know if you remember. But we can do better than that. And instead of the dominant model around algorithmic optimization, which is opportunistically figuring out where human behavior tends to sort of break down and how we can manipulate what is effective with humans to maximize their scale, that we take an opportunity to recognize that what we encode into algorithms, what we encode into machines, is us. We're putting our biases, ourselves, into everything that we digitize, everything we automate. It's our beliefs, it's our worldviews. And so the opportunity now is to really encode machines with the best of who we are and our best intentions and our clearest-headed principles. So instead of the model I just showed, where we actually use the opportunity to automate what is meaningful and then maximize human value at scale, figure out on an ongoing basis what is meaningful, increasingly what is meaningful, and amplify that. And the value is it actually serves a profit purpose too. This is not at all in contradiction with being effective as a business. So you end up with intelligent and meaningful automation that is aligned with your strategic purpose. And we may end up with a future of human work that doesn't get us closer to where we're having absurd interactions, that preserves some sense of meaning for the person who's on the inside and the person who's on the outside of the transaction within the company. And hopefully, a future of humanity where our work, the work that we do now, is actually building meaning into what can scale. That we're actually creating models of scale for meaningful human purpose. So we stop and we ask ourselves, what is it that you are trying to do at scale? This is the big question that we take back with us, and we think about all of the experience design, all of the strategy, all the operational alignment that we could do around a very clear-headed, intentional sense of what we're trying to achieve at scale. And the possibilities are endless, honestly. As for me, what I'm trying to accomplish at scale is to create more meaningful human experiences. And how I do that at scale is by speaking with groups like yours and helping you to put this kind of practice into place in your organizations so that the people that you serve will have more meaningful experiences. And so I hope you'll join me in amplifying what is meaningful and creating more meaningful human experiences. And for that, I sincerely thank you.